Purvinaka Talofa Lava Kia ora and hello ageta. From Vanuatu this time. Welcome to In the Kitchen, our little Zoom series where we have a Talanoa with a Pacific expert. And today I'm stoked that we have Dr. Basil Leodoro from Vanuatu. You will have seen him already in the Vanuatu episodes of season 2. He is a doctor, but he's also, as we've seen, a comedian. So, Basil, thank you so much. Just fantastic to see you. I haven't seen you since we filmed together, so it's awesome to see you. How's things?
It's great to see the team again, Robert. It's lovely to speak with you today.
Well, the last time we spoke, you were in Santo, and you were busy in your role with WHO, helping the cleanup and the rehabilitation of Santo after Tropical Cyclone Harold. Tell me, how are things up there?
Well, a Category 5 always leaves behind a trail of disaster and mayhem. Thankfully, or maybe not, Vanuatu has experienced Category 5s directly hitting the islands before. The interesting thing here with the border shutdown was our islands and our response teams finally had to do things on their own. So we didn't have help from Australia or New Zealand, which is our regular partners from Fiji, for example. We had to learn to do things on our own. And I think that that helped to bring the response community a bit better, the disaster response community. It certainly brought our health teams a lot closer together, forcing us to work together with our logistics teams, with our maritime authorities, forcing us to work together with the Department of Agriculture, our livestock, biosecurity. So we learned a lot of lessons in the Tropical Cyclone Harold experience. I'm glad to say our vegetables are now back up green and growing. The trees have got their leaves back. I think it's the trauma that people normally face in times of disaster and destruction like TC Harold. I think that's going to linger on for a little bit longer. And we've certainly got our mental health and psychosocial support team that's going around the communities that were affected, that are helping with that in the long term. I think people are finding their own special ways to get over this challenge. And it doesn't help that the COVID and the repatriation operation is going on at the same time. But it's been challenging. It's been a challenging couple of months for Vanuatu, but I think that we're keeping it together, and we're looking forward to new partnerships, to new ways of doing things.
It speaks volumes, to the resilience of the people of Vanuatu, that they can pick up in a situation where there is an existing NCD crisis, there is a virus, and then there's a Category 5 cyclone come in, and you can speak about this only 4 or 5 months after the event, and you're speaking in terms of resilience. And it's just fantastic to hear. I remember speaking to you when you were there, and often people think of, from the outside, they think of a storm coming through and they think of the physical destruction, but there's a lot more that goes on beyond that. I remember you mentioned some nutrition issues, especially with children in the kind of the Eastern Santo corridor. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, we very quickly recognized the malnutrition needs of children. We very quickly recognized the vulnerability of our food security systems. If you look at Santo, as you rightly mentioned, along the path of the cyclone, all the vegetation, all the farms were destroyed, and children in particular, children and women in particular, existing conditions like anemia, existing conditions like malnutrition or some form of malnutrition were exacerbated in the first 2-3 weeks of the cyclone. I mean, children went from being just acutely malnourished to severely malnourished, within a space of 1 to 2 weeks. And I don't think, with all respect to our response teams, I don't think any amount of a response team could deal with the amount of malnutrition that we were seeing. And part of that was because of the chronic malnutrition issues that were around, but also exacerbated by the Category 5 cyclone. So we were admitting, up to 2 kids with severe acute malnutrition.
Wow.
We were trying to work with partners to get emergency supplies of ready-to-eat meals, of high protein, I've forgotten the name of it now, but meals for kids, or formulas for kids, especially the under one years old. So we struggled at the hospital setting. And this is only the kids that were able to make it to a health facility and then get referred to the main hospital. We don't know what happened to the kids who are stuck on the mountainous villages, and we certainly haven't addressed that. So that's something that keeps playing on in my mind as we're moving on into the 4th or 5th month. I've still got that worry and that constant threat in my mind of our nutrition issues.
And is that part of because you work with WHO now, correct? I mean, when we met, you were working for at the hospital in Vanuatu. I remember very well a scene in Pacific Island Food Revolution where you were asking your wife for the tongs and you said, "Can you please pass me the forceps?" And we knew we had a doctor on board then. I actually remember hearing that. And I had the earpiece and I said to the director, "Did I hear that right? What?" It was so hilarious. But your role with WHO, is that more community facing than your role with the Ministry of Health?
Yeah, it is a lot more community facing. It is a great opportunity to join another team, another health team that's based here in Vila. But it is quite engaging. It's a more engaging role with the community, and it's allowed us to take the message of nutrition, food security. It's allowed us to have that discussion at the community level, which is something I've always enjoyed doing. And Dr. Annette, who's my partner as well in the Pacific Island Food Revolution, I think she shares the same passion, and she's not here today because she's gone on outreach, and today she's traveled to Tana, to another island that we often see these issues of severe acute malnutrition, anemia in adult women in particular, and they're actually down there with UNICEF to talk to our healthcare workers and to give them training on how to best advise families and patients on nutrition. So it's being a bit more proactive than waiting for the acute cases to arrive at the hospital.
Right. And of course, the nutrition in children is critical, as we've seen through my experience with Pacific Island Food Revolution, when we did the episode in season 1 around the first 1,000 days, which is a UNICEF initiative around what children eat. If you don't feed them correctly in the beginning, the rest of their life, their health is affected. I mean, one thing that we've noticed, Basil, come up a little bit, really through observing on social media, is that with the breakdown in imports due to COVID, there's been a bit of more of an looking in the backyard, a little bit more of revaluing local food, and a little bit more of showing off local dishes on Facebook, etc., which we're really excited about because Pacific Island Food Revolution, of course, we are, hard out trying to get that kind of movement going. Have you noticed that? I'm talking about Fiji, where I've seen it mainly. You got the same going on in Vanuatu?
Yes, absolutely, Robert. I've had grandfathers, children, mothers, and fathers walking up to me. Gets me a little bit emotional. Thinking about just seeing the the inspiration that they've got through the Pacific Island food revolution, and as you said, as you said, looking into their own backyards to find the answers to the nutrition problems, to the food problems, to mom and dad not working anymore, and they've come and shaken my hand and said thank you for the inspiration to look into their backyard, as you said. We have the same experience here. And I think that we're starting to, as a community, as a country, I think with the COVID messaging, with the health messaging, we're starting to look into our backyard and realize the nutritional value of our own local kakai, as we say it in Bislama. Local kakai, hemi healthy kakai. And our people are starting to look back and realize that you don't need any fancy technology. You don't need to be a qualified chef to be able to prepare nutritious meals for your family, and to start to address some of our chronic nutritional problems, some of our NCD problems, our non-communicable disease problems, and it's been a real inspiration. And I've been so proud to, just to have a chat with them and to hear what they're doing. It's really amazing.
And people recognize you from Pacific Island Food Revolution?
Oh, they recognized me before that, but yes, they...
Your notoriety was already embedded.
Probably for the wrong reasons before, but no, they yeah, absolutely. I think they recognized me from the show, from the Pacific Island Food Revolution. They come up to me to shake my hand. And me being me, the big mouth that I am, I carry on and have that conversation about. I try to find out what makes them walk up to me to shake my hand. Is it just to, meet a screen personality, or do they have a story behind it? And Robert, as you know, in the Pacific, everybody has a story behind any action that they do, and there's always a lovely inspiring story behind it, and it comes from having seen the Pacific Island Food Revolution. Interestingly as well, it comes from listening to other people who have seen the Pacific Island Food Revolution,
right?
And listening to them telling me their stories. I think I'm in the wrong profession. I should have been a farmer, because they're making good money from their local gardens, from selling the local products, and it's very inspiring to hear them tell their stories.
It's great for me to hear that the Pacific Island Food Revolution is being understood as a driver of what I guess the donors would call demand, really, around people loving their food, and that reaches into the farming community and stimulates agriculture. Let me ask you, first of all, let me ask you, how was your experience being on Pacific Island Food Revolution? What was it like for you, the man?
Robert, it was an amazing experience. It was more than I imagined it would be. It was, I don't even remember the preparations and the work that went behind it. All I have coming out of it are very, very lovely memories. Some parts of it, when I watched it, I totally forgotten about it, and I realized I was laughing during that, and I was nervous during that. And my family, after the show, my family who were on 3 other islands, my family who was in Samoa, my family who was in Wales, they all rang me up, or they messaged me and said what a great episode, and they enjoyed watching it. And the kids in our family, and I'm sure kids in many other families who watched the show had the same reaction. They thoroughly enjoyed it, and for me, as to be able to reach across the screen and to touch them and make them happy, but also that inspirational bit. I think for me it was the best part of being on the show.
Well, we certainly loved having you on the show, and you and Nanette have You're like the kind of the comedians of season two. But I mean, I was also really impressed with your cooking. I mean, you're a doctor, but apparently you can use those forceps in the kitchen as well. It was super impressive. Tell me about a little bit about children, and I noticed that you mentioned to me one time before that you watched the show as a family, and how does that play out for you in family life?
Well, watching as a family or being able to have that talanoa around the TV screen translates onto the table. And so, you know, as we're commenting on how I should have cut the onions and how I should have done this, the kids are learning at the same time. They're listening and they're learning. And when we're reinforcing, you know, good points about the benefits of yam and the benefits of island cabbage and the benefits of popo, you know, the kids translate it onto the table and they take it with them to the table. They take it with them to the schools and they tell their friends. And so it makes picking up local kaikai at the market, it just becomes the norm, I would say. It inspires kids to pick up that popo or to choose that carrot over, you know, they could go to the Chinese shops or other shops and get the packaged food. But I found in my own family life that our kids now are talking about food way more with way more insight than I was talking about food when I was growing up. And we were usually just at the table receiving the food as children, eating what we had, making sure we didn't leave any leftovers. Now the kids are actually commenting on the food and telling parents what they can eat or what they would like to eat and why they choose this food over that.
That is fantastic. That is fantastic.
It's been amazing. It's been amazing, Robert. And I don't think we'll be able to write it down or to describe it on a piece of paper, the effect that the Pacific Island Food Revolution has had, and having the recognizable faces, myself, Dr. Annette, we're working with patients every day. You know, the kids are coming on and you can see them pointing at their parents and tugging on their shirt and pointing. And you know, Annette and I, that we see that when a child does that, it opens up the opportunity for us to go and have that discussion with the family, whether it's just about the rain or recovering from the cyclone or about the food. We use that opportunity to engage. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that you are a doctor and we're on the show, because the relationship between food and health is often viewed as separate. And of course, it's intertwined fundamentally at the most fundamental level. And I think that COVID, I guess, Basil, something that has been on my mind a lot is the fact that you're a doctor, you were a cook on the show, and the relationship between food and health, they're often viewed separately. Of course, they're fundamentally, medicine should always go with food and food with medicine. In fact, food can be medicine. I think this has come up a lot in COVID around the valuing of local foods and the concept of immunity. What keeps us well? What keeps those NCDs away so that COVID, we're not quite as vulnerable to COVID? Can you speak to that a bit?
Well, I might go back to a talk I heard yesterday evening at the Cultural Museum here in Port Vila. We had a speaker who was speaking about our culture, the technology behind our culture, and the fact that in the Pacific, I would say you could translate it to the whole of the Pacific, our culture is based on food. Our events that mark an occasion, our planning towards an occasion, it all revolves around getting the food, getting the pigs fed, getting the chickens fed, getting the boat ready, getting the fishing net ready, in order to have that event happen. And when we do have those big events, those are the ones that define who we are as a Pacific people. We have cultural events that define who we are, whether it's a crowning ceremony in the Kingdom of Tonga, whether it's a chiefly pig killing ceremony in Vanuatu. The technology behind preparing the food for that event is what our forefathers grew up on. And another interesting point that was brought up at our discussion yesterday was at the cultural event was, how did our people survive a Category 5 cyclones in the past? Because Cyclone Harold this year isn't the first ever. You know, we've had cyclones. How did they survive without internet and emergency medical teams responding and imported rice and imported cans of tinned fish? How did our people survive? So the technology and the culture around good nutrition is already embedded in our culture, in our lives. It's about bringing that out. And I think his talk highlighted for me, when I realized things like we're amputating we're doing 2 major amputations every week in Vanuatu. I think it's 1 amputation every day or 2 amputations every day in Fiji.
Yeah.
Something similar, I heard the Minister of Health say. When you look at that, you realize that we're, as they say, public health physicians will say, we're at the edge of the cliff or at the mouth of the river watching the bodies float by. No one's addressing the source at the top. And I think that the answer to all our problems is already embedded inside our cultures, and health and culture, health and food, health and disaster response, or food and disaster response. That technology already exists in our Pacific cultures. It's about acknowledging that, and then I think encouraging Pacific Islanders to use that to build their own food security.
I like your use of the word technology, because that's a word that's not often associated to culture. But actually, and we've been talking with there's a UN food system summit coming up, and we've been, as a team, have been giving a lot of thought to that. The systemic approach, the scientific approach that sits around culture, and the fact that if a culture is suppressed through colonization or whatever, and there's a disruption, there's fallout from that. And part of the fallout in the Pacific is the NCD crisis. If you put the culture back together again, that'll take care of resilience, of health, of tourism identity, of economic development. It takes care of a lot of stuff. And the food system, as you point out, sits across all these big agendas.
Yep.
The development world calls them agendas, and we call them culture. We call it cultural wholeness. And it reminds me a little bit, Basil, I know that I'm off. We've had terrific support from Australia and New Zealand, and we've been really lucky with Pacific Island Food Revolution at the people we work with. But often I've found in my long history with donor relationships is languaging things and bringing that holistic view to bear is quite difficult because obviously the donors are segmented into climate change, into biodiversity, into NCDs, etc. Do you have that? Do you know what I'm talking about? The languaging?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Robert. I mean, you could say we're speaking the cultural component in the Pacific, and then the donor agendas, 2 totally different languages. And I think it's when we find those linkages that that we really see development or progress. Because as you rightly said, in the technology of our cultures, all the answers to the challenges that we're facing in the Pacific, the health challenges, the food security challenges, the climate change challenges, they're all embedded inside the technology of our cultures. Excuse me. And I think it's important. I think that donor partners need to realize that we would measure success of any program quite differently to maybe what donor partners might write down and list out. I think as a people that are close to our traditions and our customs, I think there are some very good things that we should bring back onto the agenda, that we should regard as an important component, that is a measurable or is an agenda that should be part of the package of donor funding. And I think that it's that translation and where we meet in the middle. I think that's where we should be, that's the sphere where we should be operating on. And, you know, Pacific Island Food Revolution, for me, being a Vanuatu, being far away from where you are, from where our rest of our participants are, just watching the program, watching the interaction behind, you know, the Samoan team, the Tongan team, the way they were interacting, I was there laughing, you know, beside them, because it connected us, because we measure ourselves, we have the same cultural, I wouldn't say principles, but maybe sense, cultural sense. And you can tell when somebody's nervous and somebody's happy and somebody's geared towards doing something. I was right there with them, even though I was watching from across the screen. And I think that is hard to translate into the English language, into the French language, into any language. It's actions and the spoken word. But look, as a leader, Robert, in this specific journey that we have with health and food, I think that's where your role will be very important, is trying to help us to translate that language into something that donor partners will accept, into something that donor partners will understand. So good luck with that one.
I do appreciate the role of the person in between and the messenger type entity, and I'm with you, Basil, all the way on that. So, have you got a message for the people of Vanuatu and for the people of the wider Pacific from you?
Can I start off in Bishlama first?
I would love that.
Message for me ko yumi ol man ol woman Vanuatu, especially ol pikinini lo Vanuatu. Suppose you watch a Pacific Island Food Revolution, where by you look Robert Oliver, when we tulay sub story, we stop inside. By you look Dr. Annette, stop inside. By you look all kitchen queens, so stop inside. Where them to la boy stop inside. Suppose you watch them, you learn them one something. You got one thing lo chensem way where you make a kai, chensem how where you make a kai, chensem one where you make a kai. Me one day encourage you blow you make them. Putum one where you look, equal lo action. Encourage them pikinini blow you, or pikinini you, and so she watch him show you, encourage them papa mama blow you. Blow you like change them kakai, blow you make a kai healthy kakai. From say healthy kakai, hemi island kakai blow you me. All answer where you Mr. Look out them. Istablo island kakai beli yumi mo way we misharam kakai. Suppose you know sabi how to plan them one current, any time blo yumi to lanem. Any time blo yumi to lanem blo yumi to sabi look out the health blo you with them health blo me. And to the wider Pacific community, I think we're all in this together. Even though our borders are closed, we have innovative technology these days. We have a beautiful program like the Pacific Island Food Revolution and many others like it that will connect all of us in the Pacific. I think we're in this together. We've done it before. Maybe it's not documented. Maybe it's in the spoken word of our elders, but we've done it before. We've survived the worst. And I think that we are going to survive this one. I have no doubt about it if we take this challenge on together and we look after ourselves and our families. And that starts with the Pacific Island Food Revolution, or the food revolution that we're talking about today. So I hope that you will enjoy some of these messages that we're doing. And Robert, thank you very much to you and the team for leading us down this food revolution journey. It is the key to our survival. And I thank you for being a leader in that arena.
I'm so grateful to be allowed to even do this. And it's just so great to see you, Basil. I can't wait to, when those planes are flying again, to meet you. I'll send you a message. We'll meet in one of those Nakamal bars. And,
absolutely.
and we'll be back at it. We'll be back at it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Lovely speaking with you today, Robert, as always.
Thank you. And to our viewers of In the Kitchen, just want to acknowledge the continued and fantastic support of the Australian and New Zealand government for Pacific Island Food Revolution. God bless you, Basil. My love to the family. God bless the whole Pacific Island Food Revolution family. Until we meet again.